Hey everybody, Mike Miller here with Triumph Visual, bringing you another Hitfilm tutorial. Today we're going to take a quick tour of the Hitfilm interface. Now when you first open the Hitfilm software, you will be taken to this home screen. And on the home screen you will be presented with several panels that link to recent YouTube tutorials or perhaps the occasional Twitter post. On the left side of the screen you will see a panel showing your last few recent projects, the New Project and Open Project buttons, and of course this link to the ever-important manual. Let's create a new project and take a look at the project settings page. This tab appears when you start a new project and can be accessed at any time during your edit by clicking the Project tab. Down here you will see templates for creating new projects. There will be a list of templates for a whole bunch of different resolutions and frame rates, or you can come down to video and make your own. Selecting a project width, a project height, a frame rate, and an aspect ratio. For most video formats, the default aspect ratio of 1.0 is correct. However, if you are shooting on an older high-def camera that shoots 1440 by 1080, you will need to change this to anamorphic. Below that, the Audio tab is where you select between 48, 44.1, or other sample rates, depending on the sample rate of other audio files you may choose to import. Beneath this, the rendering panel determines other aspects of Hitfilm's projects. The color bit depth can be set from 8-bit integer, 16-bit float, or 32-bit float. Most cameras record in 8-bit, but it is usually good to set this to 16-bit. This will allow Hitfilm a little bit more latitude when calculating effects like glows or blurs. 32-bit mode usually is overkill. It's really there for the 3D guys who are bringing in high bit depth images in OpenEXR format. Beneath that, you can set the anti-aliasing. The default is 4x MSAA. There are higher settings if you need them, but Hitfilm does anti-alias everything globally on export, so you should generally leave this at 4x MSAA unless you are seeing visible jaggies in your footage, in which case you can attempt to raise this. However, raising this too high will cause all of your projects to be slightly blurred. The reflection map sets the size of the map that Hitfilm uses to generate reflections in 3D objects. It can more or less be set to any size you want. For my machine, 2048 pixels is a good starting point. The shadow map size is similar to that of the reflection map, setting the size of the map that Hitfilm uses to generate shadows. If your shadows are looking blocky, increase this value. The maximum 3D model map size is only used in Hitfilm Pro and determines the maximum size of texture maps you can load in with 3D models. Once all of these parameters have been set, you can come up here and choose to save them as a custom template or delete a custom template if the project settings you want are not already located within a template. Once you've decided on your project settings, you can either start editing, which will take you to the editing timeline, or start compositing, which will take you directly into a composite shot. I'm going to click on Start Editing. Here we are in Hitfilm's editing workspace. First, I would like to take a look at the File menu located on the top left of the screen. This is where you can create new projects, open saved projects, save your active project, or save your active project with a different file name. Over here is a duplicate of the Recent Projects panel from the home screen, and the Exit button will exit Hitfilm. But what I really want to look at is the Options button, which takes you under the hood. Here in the Options panel are lots of settings to customize your Hitfilm experience. The General panel contains controls for your maximum level of undos, the default duration of still photos you add in, the default duration of new composite shots or editor timeline, how to display audio waveforms in the editor timeline, a control to set the default color bitmap for new projects, along with the default anti-aliasing, default reflection map, and default shadow map size for new projects. Other settings down here include screen layout when saving projects. I like to leave this checked. Underneath this is use relative paths in saved projects. I also tend to leave this checked. When this is unchecked, Hitfilm will use absolute file locations when trying to search for project media, Using relative paths in saved projects stores the file pointers relative to where the Hitfilm project is. So if you create a Hitfilm project inside its own folder and put all of the media inside subfolders and then move that folder to a hard drive or to another computer, Hitfilm will still be able to find the media for the project. Unchecking Use Relative Paths in Save Projects means that moving any media file associated with a project or moving the project to any other location, Hitfilm will more than likely not be able to find the media on import, and you will have to relink that. Close all media files when application is not active is useful to leave checked if you're known to go back and forth in multiple programs, for example between Hitfilm and Photoshop or Hitfilm and Audacity. Play audio when scrubbing timeline, I usually leave off, just because I find hearing audio when I scrub the timeline to be annoying. Showing help links is always helpful, so leave this on. Hide full screen preview when application is not active is useful for you dual monitor users. And if you're using a 4K monitor, you'll probably want to enable high DPI scaling. For people bringing in raw footage or 10 or 12-bit ProRes or DNx HD, you will probably want to check the use full data range when decoding 10-12-bit files. If you leave this unchecked, your video will be internally sampled to 8 bits per color channel. This Prompts and Warnings panel just contains various messages that can be turned on and off within Hitfilm. This Cache panel is where you can set the maximum size for RAM previews and where you can set the file location for the database and internal cache that Hitfilm uses. You can also determine how long to keep unused files before they are automatically purged, or you have the option of deleting the cache entirely. Proxy settings is where you set the folder that Hitfilm stores proxy files in. Proxy files are used by Hitfilm as pre-renders to take a complicated or complex shot and render it down to a piece of media for faster playback. Because Hitfilm's proxies are full resolution and lossless, you have the option of using your proxies on your final export. You should probably leave this box checked. If you took the time to build a proxy to begin with, there's no point in letting Hitfilm take the time to re-render something that's already done. You also have the option to limit the size of the proxy directory if you are short on disk space, but I usually leave this unchecked. The Autosave panel is where you can enable or disable automatic project saving, set the folder for automatic project saving, and set the frequency with which Hitfilm automatically saves projects. The default is 10 minutes, and this isn't that bad. There are some users who like to set this down to every 1 minute, thinking that this will prevent crashes or make their work safer. This is not true. Whenever Hitfilm has to save a file, it temporarily stops what it is doing while it is writing that file. Setting the autosave frequency will actually slow down your system and actually increase the chance of errors. 10 minutes to 20 minutes is usually fine. Up here is the Keyboard Shortcuts panel. This is where you can dig in and search out all of the different keyboard shortcuts Hitfilm has to offer. If you want to remap an existing shortcut to a different key, say if I wanted to change the Select tool to something else, I can just click on that, hit the key that I want to change it to, and it will be changed. If you've reset a bunch of keyboard shortcuts and have gotten lost, or just want to reset everything because you've done a quick example like this, then down at the bottom you can reset all keyboard shortcuts to their factory default. There are a lot of keyboard shortcuts in Hitfilm, and you can speed up a lot of things by using them. So this list is taking the time to check thoroughly. The last tab in the Options panel is Activations. This is where you can manage your licensing information for Hitfilm, and it will display the email that the software is licensed to, your activation key, and the unique hardware ID. If you need to uninstall Hitfilm from your computer, you should come down here and deactivate the program before you uninstall. This will let the Hitfilm servers know that you are no longer using the license on this particular computer and release the license for you to reinstall on another computer. If you happen to uninstall Hitfilm without deactivating the program, don't worry about it. You can manage your activation from the Hitfilm website. Now your screen probably doesn't look like mine, and that's because the Hitfilm interface is customizable. Up here at the top, next to the Undo and Redo buttons, is the Workspace panel. And by clicking this, you can turn off and on various panels in the Hitfilm interface. And you can store a layout of panels as a custom workspace or use one of these presets that are already set up for you. Right now, I'm going to go ahead and turn on all panels. If you want to resize panels in Hitfilm, just move the mouse pointer to the boundary between two panels. When the cursor changes to a double-headed arrow, you can click and drag to resize panels horizontally or vertically. To move a tab from one panel to the other, just click, drag, drop. To select different tabs within a panel, just click on the header for the panel and it will come up. Some panels may not show anything right now because nothing has been selected to make them active. You can also create new panels by dragging a panel to this cross icon and dropping it. This will create a new panel. To get rid of a panel, simply take the last tab within it and remove it. Each panel has a question mark icon in the upper right-hand corner. By clicking on the question mark icon, you can open up the relevant manual page for the selected panel. The media panel is where you import media into your project and manage it once it's been imported. By clicking on the import button, you can import audio media, video clips, or stills. By coming to this arrow next to the import media button, you can choose to import media just like hitting the button, or you can choose to import image sequences, composite shots, or entire Hitfilm projects, 3D camera tracking data from external applications, and in Hitfilm Pro, you will also have the option to load 3D models or 3D model animation. I'm going to come up to the File menu and open a recent project so that we have something in the media panel to look at. Once you're in the media panel, by clicking and typing here, you can sort media in the media panel just by starting to type something into this bar. Clicking the X clears the search panel. Media in the media panel can be grouped by a folder or by media type, and can be sorted by name or by type. I tend to group things by media and type. You may prefer a different setup. If arranging things by folders, you can create new folders down here by clicking on the new folder icon, typing in a name, and then you can drag media into or out of folders. You can delete a folder by clicking on the delete button, but doing so will delete all media assets in that folder. So if you've decided you don't want a folder but want to keep the media asset, just drag the media asset back out of the folder. And now this folder can be deleted. Right-clicking in the media panel brings up a context menu which allows you to make a new composite shot, a new plane, or a new folder, or brings up an import dialog, or collapses everything in the media panel. Right-clicking on a piece of media brings up another context menu. Besides the same new and import options above, you can cut, copy, paste, or duplicate media within the media panel. You can delete media from the media panel, rename media in the media panel, and look at the properties for the media within the media panel. So for this plane, I can change its size or its color. For this composite shot, I can change its duration, fog, and motion blur. For 3D models, it opens up the materials dialog, and I don't actually have any video or photo clips loaded, so I'm going to pause. Now that I've actually loaded a video clip and a still photo, we can see that clicking here for the properties. For video, I can select the frame rate, the aspect ratio, and by unchecking the From File button, I can remap this video clip to a new frame rate. Useful if you've imported some video that was recorded at a high frame rate that you want to change speed to play back at normal speed or slow motion within a project. If Save Screen Layout has been checked in the Options panel, settings in the Media panel are saved with your project as well. To use the Trimmer panel, click and drag media from the media pool and load it into the Trimmer panel. The Trimmer panel can be used to scrub through media, set in points and out points, and then send your media directly to a timeline. From the Media panel, you can also click and drag directly to the timeline and trim on the timeline if you prefer. If you want to bring video onto the editor timeline without audio, hold down the Alt key as you drag media to the timeline, and it will just bring the video with no audio. The Effects panel is used to browse effects and add them to your media clips. You have a search bar here, so if you want to start searching for a clip, just click there and start typing. By typing blur, I bring up everything in the Blurs panel and the channel blur. But note that the effects search will attempt to be smart and will also bring up things like the witness protection, which, while not a blur, does pixelate an image and performs a similar function. Clicking the X will clear the search function. Clicking a tab opens a category folder, allowing you to browse effects within each category. And if you come down to the bottom, you'll see a folder labeled Presets. This is where any 2D or 3D presets included with the Hitfilm software can be found, and this is also where you can store your own custom presets. To add an effect to a media clip, you can just click and drag to the media clip. Besides the search bar, you also have the options to limit the effects displayed in the effects panel to 3D effects, 2D effects, audio effects presets, 3D presets, 2D transitions, and audio transitions, or show all. You can also choose to sort alphabetically from A to Z or from Z to A. There is also a right-click context menu in the effects panel, which allows you to either collapse all trees or import any custom presets you are migrating from an earlier version of Hitfilm or downloaded from places like the Hitfilm Preset Marketplace on inkscapedigital.com. Over here is the timeline panel. The timeline panel lets you switch between your editor timeline or any composite shot timelines you may have loaded up in your project. The editor timeline is tracked-based. A track means that you can have more than one media clip per track, and you can click and move them and adjust them. On the left side are your basic editing tools, and below that are the buttons to send your editor timeline to the export queue. Next to that is this slider. This is the timeline zoom, and by dragging to the right, you can zoom in on your timeline, and to the left, you can zoom out. Right next to the zoom slider is this tiny little triangle, which is very hard to spot, but it contains a few important controls for Hitfilm. By clicking on that, you can change the size of a video track or an audio track. You can also set the preview mode for the thumbnails displayed in the editor timeline. Full attempts to draw preview thumbnails throughout everything. Start and end only displays a start and an end photo, and setting this to none displays no previews within the timeline blocks. Setting this to none will speed up your editing, so if your editing is moving slowly, try setting the preview to none and see if that speeds things up. You can also mute and unmute tracks, and choose to toggle track and object envelopes. Above is the timeline ruler, which displays where the playhead is in hours, minutes, seconds, and frames. However, you can right-click on this and change this to display as frames, and just view absolute frame numbers. By right-clicking on a media clip on the editor timeline, you bring up yet another context menu. This is where you can set a layer blend mode. You can choose to transform a layer to fit to frame, frame width, frame height, or center in the frame, and you can change the speed of a clip, as well as standard cut, copy, and paste operations. You can convert a clip into a composite shot, slice the clip into two where the playhead is, send to the export queue, delete the clip and ripple everything farther down the timeline, or you can choose to make a proxy. If we switch from the editing timeline to a composite shot, we see mostly the same thing. Over to the left, we still have the buttons to select various editing tools. We still have our options to send to the export queue, but now we have the composite shot properties. Clicking on the composite shot properties again lets you change the width, height, frame rate, aspect ratio of the composite shot, and advanced settings such as distance, fog, and motion blur. Composite shots are different from the editing timeline. The editing timeline is track-based, where you can have multiple pieces of media on one track. Composite shots are layer-based. In a composite shot, you can only have one piece of media on any individual layer. The purpose of composite shots is to set up complex effect shots and reduce them to one piece of media so that they can be later dragged into the editor timeline. Right-clicking media in the layer stack will bring up context menus that have different options depending on what type of media you've clicked on. Just like the media and effects panels, you have the option to search in timeline. By searching for lights, it brings up the 4 lights that are in this scene, but it also brings up the billboard lights toggle for the particle effect being used and the hue, saturation, and lightness effect being used on the grade layer. Multiple search terms can be used in a single search by separating them with a comma. By adding intensity, now I bring up my lights and the intensity parameters. Because I was using light and intensity, didn't have to finish intensity, it was smart enough to figure that out, I was only getting the intensity parameters for the lights. But if I remove light for the search string, then I get the intensity parameter for the ambient occlusion in the model layer. The search bar is pretty intelligent and pretty easy to use, and it's one of the more powerful new additions in Hitfilm Pro 2017. Of course, I can clear that by clicking this X. Just like in the editor timeline, I can turn layers off and on. I can also choose to turn off and on motion blur, set the compositing mode to 2D, 3D, or 3D unrolled, or assign a parent for advanced animation rigs. By clicking on these triangles next to a piece of media, I open up the layer controls. Layer controls can be twirled down and edited directly on the timeline panel, or we can come up to the controls panel. The controls panel has its own search bar, which is very helpful. Searching for individual parameters in a layer that has a lot of effects on it might involve a lot of opening and closing trees. The controls panel is also used to adjust properties for an active layer, transformations and animations for an active layer, masks for an active layer, or manage any effects applied to. The controls panel in the editor timeline works exactly the same way as the composite shot timeline, with the only exception being you cannot keyframe parameters in the editor timeline. To keyframe animate parameters, you must be working in a composite shot. One thing to look for in the controls panel when editing effects is anything with this hollow gray circle. Any parameter with a hollow gray circle can be keyframed or animated. Clicking on a gray circle turns it into a blue circle. Once I have a blue circle, moving the playhead and shifting a parameter will cause a parameter to animate over time. Once keyframes are set, I can use these buttons in the timeline panel to go back and forth between keyframes, to add or delete keyframes at individual frames, and to set the interpolation type of the keyframes. To see a keyframe on the timeline panel, you will need to come down and twirl the effect open in the layers panel. So now we can see stepping back and forth from keyframe to keyframe, changing the interpolation type of a keyframe, or deleting a keyframe and creating a keyframe. Currently over on the right is the viewer panel. The viewer panel is where you see the active project you were working on. On the left-hand side of the viewer panel are controls to select objects, scroll the frame around, create text, create masks, toggle render options, and turn off and on the 3D grid or motion path displays. On the top right of the viewer panel are controls for 3D navigation. At the bottom right is a display that shows the current cursor position within the world and sets a view magnification. I can set this to zoom to fit, and things will automatically scale to be the size of the current panel. Or I can choose a zoom magnification. Perhaps I want to zoom in to 100%, and then look particularly at that spot. Also in the viewer panel, I can choose to look at an active camera, a perspective shot of the entire 3D world, or I can choose front, back, left, right, top, and bottom orthogonal views. I can also select a split screen view where I can show up to 4 different panels. Each panel can show a different view. Setting up multiple 3D views makes it a lot easier to place objects in 3D space. These controls for local, world, or view determine how 3D widgets for 3D points and 3D objects will be displayed. By selecting it to view, the point is oriented to the current window. By selecting world, it is oriented to the full 3D world, and by selecting local, it is oriented to the individual object. This menu controls if we are displaying a straight RGB, RGB straight, alpha, red, green, or blue channel in the viewer. Normally, you would leave this set to RGB. Over here are the rendering resolution options, full, half, or quarter. If you're getting slow performance in a complex composite shot, you can speed things up by shifting to a lower resolution. Or you have the option of turning on anti-aliasing to get a preview of how things will really look on final output. Toggling off anti-alias back to full you can see a little bit more jaggedness in the front of this F18. The Options panel contains all of the same controls found down here, but adds some others, including exporting frames if you need to export a single frame to disk, to re-import, or to send off to someone else. At the bottom of the viewer panel is a timeline display, which can also be set to time and frames. You can have this set to frames and this set to timecode, or vice versa if you want to see both. At the bottom of the viewer panel are controls for setting in and out points, or navigating the timeline, going to the beginning of the timeline, moving forward in the timeline by one frame, backward by one frame, playing your timeline back, or generating a RAM preview. The text panel is used to edit text. For the text layer to be active, there must be a text object on the timeline, and the text tool must be activated over in the viewer layer. Then the text panel will become active, allowing you to change your font, change the text size, text color, add an outline to your text, set the outline color, set justification, and all other text options. The lifetime panel is not active unless you have an active particle simulation. That particle simulation layer is selected, and a particle system has been selected in that particle simulation layer. The tracking panel is not active until you have selected a piece of video media on the timeline and clicked this plus icon to create a tracker on that layer. Now we're in a simple composite shot where I've loaded up a piece of media, applied the chrominator effect, made the layer 3D, and moved it in space. And that brings me to the Layer tab, which is inside the viewer panel. Clicking on the Layer tab shows me the video or still image without any effects applied. This is very useful if I want to apply masks to an effect that already has layers on it or has been moved in 3D space. When clicking and drawing a mask inside the Layer panel, I will still see the mask applied once I close it, but it still makes it easier to add the mask looking at the layer in 2D space without any effects. Then when I go back to the viewer panel, we can see that my layer is now properly masked and chrominated. We've almost completed our tour of the Hitfilm interface. We've only got 3 panels to look at, and 2 of them are related to each other. First, I'm going to come down in the editor timeline, right-click on Audio 1, and click on Insert Track to create 2 audio tracks. And that created a new panel up here in the audio mixer. The audio mixer is used to set the volume, the pan, mute, and solo any individual audio tracks that may be on your timeline. So if I drag 2 pieces of audio on, I can now individually pan these. Perhaps I'm going to pan audio 2 all the way to the right and audio 1 all the way to the left, which gives me this. Assuming my screen recording software recorded that sounded really terrible, and I'm sorry. But you saw the audio levels for Audio 1, Audio 2, and the master track showing both levels. That also brings us to the Audio Meters channel here on the right of my screen. The Audio Meters panel simply shows the final output level for your audio. Finally, we have only one last panel to look at, and that's the Processor tab, which I'm going to drag up to this top panel. The Processor tab does one thing and one thing only, and that's to show you the status of the creation of any proxies that you may have active. That's it. That's all it does. There's actually one more panel in the Hitfilm interface, but we're not going to cover that here. The Scopes panel has a full tutorial over on the official Hitfilm YouTube page that I happen to do, so I'll just refer you to that. I hope you found this tour of the Hitfilm user interface helpful. I'm Mike Miller for Triam Visual, and I'll see you next time.